Nobody told you that silence has a price tag. Your parents didn't sit you down. Nobody pulled out a whiteboard. Nobody said, hey, here's how money actually works in this country. Here's what will happen to you if you ignore it. And here's the specific knowledge that will either set you free or keep you trapped for decades. That conversation never happened. Not because your parents didn't love you. Not because they were bad people, but because nobody had it with them either. And the system we all grew up inside was specifically designed to keep that conversation from ever taking place. And the cost of that silence, it's not abstract, it's not theoretical. It's sitting in your bank account right now, or more accurately, it's sitting in the account it should have become if someone had just told you the truth about money when you were 18 years old. Let me be brutally direct about something before we go any further. The average person who starts investing at 25 with just $200 a month will have over $525,000 by the time they're 65, assuming a 7% average annual return, which, for context, is actually conservative for a diversified index fund over 40 years. The same person who starts at 35 with the same $200 a month, they end up with around $243,000. Same discipline, same sacrifice, same $200. A $282,000 difference. Just because of a 10-year gap. That's not a math trick. That's not some financial guru trying to scare you into buying a course. That's compound interest, and it is the single most powerful force in personal finance. And almost nobody explained it to you as a teenager when it would have actually mattered. That's the conversation your parents never had with you. That's the one we're having right now. So let's go back to the beginning. Why didn't they tell us? I've thought about this a lot, and I think there are a few things happening simultaneously. First, money is genuinely uncomfortable to talk about in most households. We'll talk about politics at dinner. We'll talk about religion. We'll talk about people we don't like and relationships that went sideways. But the moment someone asks, how much do you make? Or what's in your savings account? The room goes quiet. There's this deep cultural embarrassment around money, especially in households where there wasn't enough of it. And that embarrassment creates silence. Not malicious silence. Just silence. Second, and this is the harder one to hear, a lot of our parents were also flying blind. They were doing their best with the information they had, which was often not much. If you grew up in a working-class household, your parents' financial strategy was survival. Make it to the end of the month, keep the lights on, hope the car doesn't break down. There wasn't a wealth-building conversation to have because there wasn't a wealth-building strategy in place. And if you grew up in a middle-class household, the strategy was often work hard, get a good job, buy a house, contribute to your 401k, which is better than nothing, but it skips roughly 90% of what you actually need to know. Third, and this one might make you uncomfortable, there are systems, actual institutional systems, that benefit enormously from your financial illiteracy. The credit card industry made $120 billion in revenue from interest and fees alone in a recent single year. $120 billion. That number doesn't exist if people actually understand how credit card interest compounds and how minimum payments work. The payday loan industry, the rent-to-own industry, the overdraft fee industry, these are all multi-billion-dollar machines that run on financial ignorance. And we don't teach comprehensive financial literacy in most schools. You learned the Pythagorean theorem. You probably haven't used it since. But you've definitely used, or been used by, compound interest. And yet here we are. So what actually should have been said? What is the conversation that needed to happen when you were 15, 16, 17 years old, sitting at that kitchen table, before you made decisions that would follow you for decades? Let's have it now. Better late than never. The first thing nobody told you is that your first salary negotiation sets the trajectory for your entire career. Think about that. Not just for your first job, for your entire career. Because most raises are percentage-based. If you negotiate your starting salary from $45,000 to $52,000, which is not only possible but expected, you haven't just made $7,000 more in year one. You've raised the baseline from which every future percentage raise will be calculated. You've raised the floor of what you'll be able to say you were previously earning when you interview for your next job. You've changed the number from which your retirement contributions will be calculated if they're percentage-based. That $7,000 difference in year one can compound into hundreds of thousands of dollars over a career, And nobody told you that negotiating is not rude. It is expected. It is professional, and saying yes to the first number they offer is actually the weird thing to do. Employers expect negotiation. They build it into their offers. They are not going to pull the offer because you countered. And yet most people, especially young people, especially women, especially people from working class backgrounds who were taught not to ask for too much, just say yes to the first number and smile. The data on this is staggering. A Carnegie Mellon study found that people who negotiate their first salary earn an average of $5,000 more than those who don't. And researchers who ran the numbers over a 40-year career with standard raises found that number eventually compounds to over $600,000 in lost earnings. $600,000. Because you didn't say, "Thank you so much, I'm really excited about this role. Is there any flexibility on the compensation?" That's all it takes. That's the script. You didn't have it. Nobody gave it to you. Now let's talk about credit, because this is where a lot of people's financial lives go sideways before they even realize what's happening. Nobody explained how credit actually works. Not in any useful way. You probably got a vague warning about don't get into debt, and maybe a scary story about someone who ruined their life with credit cards. But the nuanced reality that your credit score is a financial reputation that follows you everywhere, that it affects your ability to rent an apartment, get a job at certain companies, get a car loan, get a mortgage, and that building it strategically from a young age is one of the highest leverage financial moves you can make. That part? Missing. Here's what actually matters with credit. Your score is primarily determined by 5 factors. Payment history at 35%, credit utilization at 30%, length of credit history at 15%, credit mix at 10%, and new credit inquiries at 10%. Most people know the first one, pay your bills on time. But almost nobody in their early 20s understands credit utilization, which is your second biggest factor. Credit utilization is the ratio of your current balance to your credit limit. If you have a $2,000 credit limit and you carry a $1,800 balance, your utilization is 90%, and that is destroying your score even if you pay it on time every single month. The experts recommend keeping utilization below 30%, ideally below 10%. So if you have a $2,000 limit, keep your balance under $200 for the best score impact. Nobody told you this. You just used the card and wondered why your score wasn't moving. And the credit card interest rate conversation, let's have that one too. The average credit card APR right now is around 21%. 21%. If you carry a $5,000 balance on a card at 21% APR and you only make minimum payments, which are typically about 2% of your balance, so roughly $100 on a $5,000 balance, do you know how long it takes to pay that off? Roughly 28 years. And you'll pay nearly $8,000 in interest on a $5,000 balance. You will pay $13,000 total for $5,000 in stuff. And the stuff will be gone. Long gone. You'll have nothing to show for it except a smaller bank account and 28 years of minimum payments. That's not a character failing. That's math. That's a system designed to extract money from people who don't understand how the math works. And the solution isn't complicated. It's just, never carry a balance if you can help it. And if you do carry a balance, make more than the minimum payment every single time. The difference between paying $150 instead of $100 on that $5,000 balance is over $5,000 in total interest and more than 20 years off your repayment timeline. $50 a month, 20 plus years and $5,000. That information should have been delivered to every single one of us before we ever held a credit card. Now here's the one that I think causes the most damage over the longest period of time, and it's the one people talk about the least. Taxes. The American tax code, and really, the tax code in most countries, is written by people who understand it for people who understand it. And if you don't understand it, you will pay more than you legally have to every single year for your entire working life. That's not conspiracy. That's just how it works. Let me give you the simplest version of what nobody explained. Your income is taxed in brackets, not at a single flat rate. If you make $60,000 a year, you are not paying your highest tax rate on all $60,000. You're paying 10% on the first roughly $11,000, 12% on the next portion, 22% on income above about $44,000. These numbers shift with inflation adjustments, but the structure is the same. Your effective tax rate is lower than your marginal rate. Nobody explained this to you, so when someone told you, if you get a raise you might end up in a higher tax bracket, you might have actually been worried about earning more money, which is one of the most persistent and damaging financial myths in existence. You cannot earn a raise and end up with less money due to moving into a higher tax bracket. Only the dollars above the threshold get taxed at the higher rate. The rest stays exactly the same. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where the people who understand this gain a massive advantage. Tax deductions and tax-advantaged accounts are not loopholes for rich people. They're tools available to everyone that most people never use, because nobody explained what they were. A 401k or similar employer-sponsored retirement account lets you invest pre-tax dollars, meaning you reduce your taxable income by every dollar you put in. If you're in the 22% tax bracket and you contribute $5,000 to your 401k, you just saved $1,100 in taxes this year, right now, in addition to the compound growth on that $5,000 over decades. And if your employer offers a match, which is essentially free money added to your account for no reason other than you showed up and contributed, and you're not taking the full match, you are leaving your own compensation on the table. You negotiated for it by taking the job. You are simply not claiming it. An HSA, a health savings account, if you have a high deductible health plan, is what financial experts call the triple tax advantage. Your contributions are pre-tax. The growth is tax-free. Withdrawals for qualified medical expenses are tax-free. It is the only account in the entire tax code with 3 layers of tax advantage, and most people have no idea it exists or how to maximize it. A Roth IRA lets you invest after tax dollars, meaning you pay taxes now, but never pay taxes on the growth or withdrawals in retirement. If you're young and in a low tax bracket right now, that's extraordinarily powerful. You pay 12% now instead of 22% later, and all the compound growth in between. Tax-free. These are not complicated tools. They're not exclusive to wealthy people. They're available to you. But nobody sat down and said, here's how the tax code actually works. And here are the 3 accounts you should open and contribute to before you do basically anything else with your money. That conversation didn't happen. Let's talk about the psychology of money for a second, because this is arguably the most important part, and it's also the part that no amount of data can fully replace. We make financial decisions emotionally. All of us. Even people who study this for a living. The research on this is overwhelming. Behavioral economics has spent decades documenting the ways our brains systematically make irrational financial decisions under predictable conditions. We feel the pain of a loss about twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This is called loss aversion, and it means that when the stock market drops 20%, we panic and want to sell, which locks in our losses and takes us out of the market right before it recovers. The people who weathered every single stock market crash in the last 100 years and just stayed invested came out ahead every single time. The people who panic sold locked in losses and missed the recovery. But our brains aren't wired for that. Our brains feel that 20% drop as emergency level painful, and they scream at us to do something. Understanding this pattern doesn't make you immune to it, but it gives you the ability to recognize what's happening and act against it deliberately. That's the difference between a portfolio that survives and one that doesn't. We also have something called present bias, which is basically our tendency to value a smaller reward now over a larger reward later. This is why saving for retirement feels abstract and distant when you're 23 and the weekend is right there. It's why the $200 a month that would make you a millionaire feels like too much to set aside when you could have it in your pocket right now. The solution to present bias isn't willpower. Willpower is unreliable and exhausts itself. The solution is automation. Set up automatic transfers to your investment accounts on payday before you can spend the money, before you can weigh it against the thing you want this week. Make the right behavior the default behavior, and future you will thank present you in a language present you actually understands. Money. And then there's lifestyle inflation, which is the silent destroyer of financial progress. You get a raise. You upgrade your apartment. Your income goes up. Your spending goes up. Your actual savings rate stays exactly the same. You're running faster on the same treadmill. The people who build real wealth are almost universally the people who, at some point, decided that their savings rate would increase faster than their lifestyle, Who said, I can live on what I'm making now, so the raise goes to investments? That decision, which nobody tells you to make, which runs counter to every advertisement and social expectation you've ever absorbed, is where the actual wealth starts. Now, I want to address something I hear constantly, which is, this is all well and good, but I don't have any money to invest. And I hear you, I really do. The cost of living is objectively brutal right now. Housing costs have increased over 60% in the last 5 years in many major markets. Grocery bills are up. Wages haven't kept pace. These are real constraints, not excuses. But here's the question I want to push back with, because I think it matters. Is the constraint as tight as it feels? Or has the discomfort of looking at your actual spending numbers kept you from finding the real answer? Most people have never done a genuine spending audit, not a vague sense of where their money goes, but an actual line-by-line review of 3 months of bank and credit card statements. When researchers and financial coaches have people do this exercise, the results are consistently surprising, not because people are secretly rich, but because there are almost always 2 or 3 categories where spending is significantly higher than they thought, driven by small, frequent purchases that don't feel like decisions because they happen automatically. Subscriptions you forgot about. Coffee and food purchases that add up to $400 a month because no single transaction felt significant. Apps, streaming services, memberships. I'm not going to tell you to stop buying coffee. That's financial advice theater, and the math doesn't work out to meaningful wealth regardless. But I am telling you that if you've never actually looked, you don't actually know, and you owe it to yourself to look before you conclude there's nothing there. And if you genuinely have looked, if the margins are genuinely that thin, then the conversation shifts from how do I invest to how do I increase my income, which is a solvable problem, a harder problem, but one with more leverage than cutting expenses indefinitely. Side income, remote skills development, career pivots, salary negotiation at review time, geographic arbitrage. These are all real tools with real returns, and none of them require you to already have money. They require time and intentionality, and yes, they're hard. But they're available to you. Here's what I want you to hold on to as we get into the practical framework. The 50-30-20 rule is the simplest starting framework that most people have never been given. 50% of your take-home pay goes to needs, housing, food, utilities, transportation, minimum debt payments. 30% goes to wants, dining out, entertainment, travel, anything that improves your life but isn't strictly necessary. And 20% goes to savings and investments and extra debt payments. If you're starting from zero, maybe that 20% is actually 5% right now. That's okay. Start with what's real. The point is to have a number, to know your number, and to automate it. You can't manage what you don't measure, and most people are navigating their entire financial lives without a map. Once you have any savings base at all, and the target is 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash, in a high-yield savings account earning something near the current interest rate rather than the 0.01% your bank probably pays by default, your next priority is getting any employer match in your retirement accounts, then high-interest debt, then maxing your Roth IRA if you're eligible, then additional retirement contributions, then taxable investment accounts. That's the order. That's the hierarchy. It's not magic. It's not secret. But nobody laid it out in sequence and said, this is the order, go in this order, don't skip ahead. And about investing specifically, because this is where fear and confusion do the most damage. You don't need to pick stocks. You don't need to understand earnings ratios or technical analysis or any of the language that makes investing feel like something only certain people can do. Index funds changed the math entirely. A total market index fund or an S&P 500 index fund gives you exposure to hundreds or thousands of companies in a single investment, charges you a fraction of a percent in fees, and has historically returned an average of 7 to 10% annually over long periods. You are not trying to beat the market. Roughly 90% of actively managed funds fail to beat their benchmark index over 10-year periods. The professionals, with teams of analysts and billions of dollars and decades of experience, can't reliably beat the index. You, buying a low-cost index fund and holding it for 30 years, will outperform most of them. That's not a knock on intelligence. That's just the math of costs and time. Vanguard, Fidelity, and Schwab all offer low-cost index funds. You can open an account in an afternoon. You can start with $50. The amount matters less than the habit, especially at the beginning, because you're building the pattern and the psychological relationship with investing as a normal, automated, unremarkable part of your financial life, rather than something that requires a special occasion or a perfect moment. Here's something that I think about a lot, and I want to leave you with this because I think it reframes the whole conversation. The wealth gap in this country, and in most countries, is not primarily a talent gap or even an income gap. It's an information gap compounded over time. The families who have money have it in part because they have these conversations. Not because their kids are smarter, not because they work harder, but because someone at a dinner table somewhere told a teenager, "Here's how a Roth IRA works. Here's why you negotiate every offer. Here's how credit utilization affects your score. Here's what compound interest will do for you if you start now." That information, passed down like any other inheritance, creates generation after generation of people who know how to navigate the system. The people who don't have those conversations start from behind. They make the same mistakes because nobody warned them. They pay the same avoidable fees and interest and penalties because the system never explained itself and nobody in their corner explained it either. And then those outcomes get misread as evidence of personal failing, that as laziness, as poor character, as bad decisions, when a lot of it was simply the absence of a 45-minute conversation that should have happened when they were 17. We can be angry about that, we should be angry about that, but we can't stay there because the years will pass regardless. The question is what you do with them. You now have the conversation. Maybe it's 10 years late, maybe it's 20. It doesn't matter. The best time to start was the day you turned 18. The second best time is right now, today, this week, before the next week passes and the inertia of not acting on it solidifies into another year of the same. Open the high-yield savings account this week. Look up your employer match and make sure you're getting all of it. Pull up 3 months of bank statements and actually look at them. Research the Roth IRA contribution limits for this year. If you have high-interest debt, run the numbers on what you're actually paying and make one additional payment this month, even a small one. Don't wait for a moment when you feel fully informed and fully ready, because that moment doesn't come until you're already moving. Clarity follows action. It doesn't precede it. That's the actual law of personal finance that nobody puts in the textbooks. The conversation your parents never had with you about money, you're having it now. What you do next is the part that actually matters.